came to the Ohio Solar Congress to present on Solar 101. I came from Washington, D.C., and I figured that renting an electric vehicle would be about as expensive as it was to fly to Columbus and then rent and come down. So I rented a Tesla and drove it here, and it was amazing. Used autopilot along the way, stopped at a few Tesla supercharger areas, and had a great ride. Much better than flying. Now I want one. That's the problem with driving a car that's awesome and amazing, is then you get hooked. Price range is probably around $50,000. It's the Tesla 3. The price is supposed to be $35,000, but it's probably more like $50,000 when you add all the bells and whistles that you want onto it.
Is this your rental?
This is the rental, yes.
There
we go. Look at you.
Yeah,
you're an expert already.
Oh.
You're ready for auto control. You don't need that.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, I stopped. It took me about 50 minutes to go all the way back to 275, which, you know, it's not that quick, but, you know, you stop and have lunch. Yeah.
Hello.
80 miles, did you say, on a charge?
80 miles is what the sticker says. In Ohio, it's 60 because there's hills.
Do you get back miles descending hills?
No, the new one does have regenerative braking.
Oh, and it tells you what you have left?
Yes. I have 50% power because it's winter time and the batteries are not fully charged as well.
You're telling me.
I think you're going to see an awful lot.
Tesla was smart. They built an infrastructure along with the car. Nobody else has done that. They actually sponsored it.
Oh, it's his car. You might want to ask him.
Okay.
He knows. Well, I can say it too if he's eating. This is a Honda Clarity plug-in hybrid, which means it gets about 50 miles of electric vehicle range, and after that, a gas engine kicks in. So for most people's day-to-day travels, they can be all electric. The interior is nice and natural.
How fast? Did we charge 25 miles on fast charge? In like 1 minute?
I mean, I'm glad they have it in there.
I don't know. It's pretty quick. It's Chatham, right?
Yeah.
So this one's really interesting because it's one of the only plug-in hybrid SUVs in America right now. But this vehicle would go 25 miles before you plug it in, and after that you can also just drive it on gas too. But a lot of people like this one. I think it sold out very quickly. Rick has a planning company called Burke. We're going to guess he's still a little unsure of the rocky motion, you know. But he's only 2, so he's dying.
It's our 3rd annual Solar Congress. Yes. This event has grown every year exponentially. Very excited as a native of Southeast Ohio. Athens County is actually #1 in the state per capita for solar. How many of you were with us that first Solar Congress back at Zane State? Quite a few. How many of you were with us last year in Wilmot, in Amish country? Different hands, that's great. A lot of you are leaders in your own communities, statewide, organizations, so I smile as I see different faces around the room and the great work that's happening across the solar movement, clean energy. Whether you're brand new to solar, want to learn more about it today, or whether you've had solar for 10 years, in the trenches on policy, there's a little something for everybody. We started in Ohio in 2016. In that time, we've helped almost 200 homes go solar, homes and businesses. I'm really excited to see the expansion of the solar community as well. We've had insurance agencies go solar, we've had farms, we've had restaurants, a lot of homes, a few churches. It's really neat to see solar expand. It's really become affordable for a lot more folks if we reach parity on pricing. It's also becoming a major driver in our economy. So we're seeing over 7,000 folks employed in solar now. So let me say that again, over 7,000 individuals are employed in solar just in the state of Ohio. So that is a major part of our economy at this point. We are now representing 1 in 800 jobs, so it's growing 12 times the national average. Solar is part of the new economy that we're building statewide here in Ohio, but also here in Appalachia specifically. So that's exciting. Folks in this room, accordingly, are job creators, so we need to own that.
I'm a professor here at Boyman School. It's a distinct pleasure to welcome you all to Ohio University, to Athens, and to the region. And there clearly is a lot of work to do. The scope of our challenge is truly daunting, but the opportunities presented by renewable energy and solar in particular are immense, and so we need to do what we're doing and advance it. Please do not mistake this for an ivory tower. The detached, the disengaged, the remote scholar stereotype. Like Luke, I'm from the region, from Athens, and 7 years ago I had a chance to come back after working in the policy realm for a couple decades in Washington, and it was because I knew that the model was to be doers and make impact and be engaged. So engagement and partnership and collaboration with practitioners on all levels is really fundamental to our approach. But it's still aimed at directly empowering and informing practitioners. So, for example, I was honored a couple of years ago to serve as lead author on the 5th assessment of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change as to the scope of the problem and the ways that we need to move forward. Broader green energy set of questions, advanced biofuels, and even the kind of flip side is the high cost that we're paying ecologically, health, environmentally, economically for old energy and not making the transition we're talking about today. We are a school, and so we do, with support from the AP Foundation or even our facilities department here on campus, we are really training the next generation of green energy leaders. We have a class called Interacting with the Media, so that, like the session this afternoon, we're more empowered and understanding of how we take complex issues and make them relatable. The role of the university is to do analysis and then pass the baton to the practitioners to run the next 3 legs of the race and finish the race. Perhaps we're a cross-country team where everybody has to get across the line for us to succeed. The role that we want to play here at the university in partnership with all the practitioners today. And those of you who are here in town will know that we have a really dynamic green energy and solar ecosystem. Third Sun Solar is one of the supporters of this conference and a great example of that. We're privileged at the Voynich School to actually have a tech growth investment fund, $50 million investment fund to build technology-based companies in the region. Well, it turns out that we're working with a lot of these dynamic renewable energy and solar companies in doing that. We also do it with the social enterprise ecosystem. So the race continues today. We're definitely on the clock. There's definitely a sense of urgency. It's probably more of a marathon than a sprint. So welcome and thank you very much.
You have been partaking in the pastries up front, that all the food today is solar powered. If you haven't checked out the butter, we actually carved out solar in the butter. A few folks ask how this event's free. We do have folks that help underwrite the event. So you go like Solar and Third Sun Solar. Devil's Kettle Brewery tonight is also a solar powered venue. Thank you to all those folks.
I've been here since 2016, mostly doing renewable energy research and economic development research. What we're going to be talking about today are sort of 3 different scales of solar PV deployment, right? Small scale, community, and utility solar energy research on and around campus. I'm going to be starting with an old friend and a Master's of Environmental Studies alum, Alex Burke, who's up in Columbus now, working at Cardinal Health. He's an environmental sustainability and energy procurement advisor. Alex has been instrumental in understanding the PV scenarios around campus. After Alex, we're going to be transitioning to Sarah Conley-Ballou, another good friend and MPA alum. We have our 2 academic programs, Environmental Studies and Public Administration. Those of you who are local probably know Sarah as a local energy champion. She's going to be talking about Solar in Your Community Challenge through the Department of Energy. Sarah's at Rural Action now, but was formerly with Upgrade Athens and Upgrade Ohio. And then last big project that we're doing with AEP Ohio, they have this commitment to deploy 400 megawatts of PV in the Appalachian region. So we're going to be talking about utility scale solar deployment. So we're starting small and we're working big. Colleague Christelle Kalaf on the end, who's our Voinovich School economist, who's helping a lot with the workforce and economic impact aspects of the project. So
I'm Alex Burke, a graduate of Ohio University twice. First in 2015 with a chemistry degree, and then again in 2017 with environmental studies degree through the Voinovich School. Integrated education of solar PV at Ohio University. And the question actually came up in a debate with my dad. And it was, why does Ohio University not have sweeping solar across all of its campus? I started to think about Ohio University as a public institution, one that had just secured a 100-year bond that planned to be here for far beyond the standard ROI on a solar project. What were the driving factors and what is part of the decision-making process? When I came to grad school, my strongest skill set as it related to solar was understanding the fundamentals of how it worked. As an undergrad, I did photochemistry research, so I was inherently interested in the way light interacted with materials, and that led me to solar. I availed myself to economics classes, engineering classes, policy classes, as well as sustainability assessment-focused classes. The ecosystem for learning about solar was in place. As an undergraduate, I had no understanding of solar at Ohio University. How many of you are familiar with the number of solar panels and or projects that are here at Ohio University? If I told you that we had 5 different distinct solar arrays, who would agree with me on that? My project actually added the 5th array onto campus. But one of the problems with these arrays is they're on top of Chubb Hall, they're on top of Lausche plant, and then the other 2 are out at the compost facility. All of which are great. We're producing solar power and we're improving our carbon footprint and doing all of the right things, but nobody knows about it. So I started to engage with the facilities team here, and I proposed my pipe dream to develop a solar array on campus that would be utilized to help confirm some of the research I was doing. Solar can be positioned in a variety of different ways. You want to optimize it so you're maximizing the sun exposure. So I did some modeling to understand what that meant in Southeast Ohio, but then I wanted to have a solar array to verify those model results. The solar array that I was going to put up, it was going to be an uphill struggle. Creating a solar array to produce energy for the university was not something that I was going to be able to pull off on a major scale. I wasn't going to be able to get megawatts of solar onto this campus. So what I wanted to do was to make a small array that could be utilized for a variety of things, namely increasing the amount of education exposure of solar PV at Ohio University. So I scoured the university for different places to where we could put these solar arrays. And where I found was the best place was right in the backyard of the Voinovich School, right behind Building 22. Go up to the ridges just over the river. Building 22, right around the corner, you'll see those 9 solar panels, which are positioned directly behind where the environmental studies students are taking classes every day, so they're now constantly exposed to that and starting to ask questions. But furthermore, the CDC is just on the other side of the road, so you have much younger people being exposed and seeing solar at Ohio University and in their community on a day-to-day basis. I worked to make sure that this resource was available for future students, future community members. And so I was able to hand off everything I did, all of that, to the Office of Sustainability as well as the Facilities Department. And those 2 groups of people today are still working to allow people access to that solar data. I designed the solar array in a way so that you can adjust the parameters and continue studies in new ways beyond what I had previously studied. So far it's been successful. I've been asked from the engineering school as well as some colleagues within the Voinovich School to help students who want to use research. And it's only been 2 years, but I've already been receiving those inquiries on an annual basis, and that was the exact intention. This county is the highest solar per capita in the state. It goes to show the synergy between this community and the university aligning and trying to create a future that is brighter, figuratively and literally. We've also been able to engage with the community. Last year, the Green Energy Ohio tour made a stop at that solar array. So that's bringing other community members to see some of the work that's going on. I learned an incredible amount and a lot of complexity to deploying a solar project. That's probably why we don't have a 3 megawatt facility solar array here at Ohio University today. But I believe that in the future, there will certainly be a much larger deployment of solar within the university. Yep.
So what % of OU's energy comes from solar? 1, 2?
Maybe 1. Well, most of it was I was in a 2-year program, and from my understanding, developing a utility scale solar project can take all of that 2 years. So in order to get me an array on campus and get data from it and then still get into my thesis, I needed to parse that off. But a lot of it was just an assumption that, well, why isn't this happening yet? There must be some sort of major reasoning. As I dug more into it and had more conversations with AEP, who's a utility for the university, and financially it's challenging for them. They get a good rate today. Economics are a major driver. And part of my research, I did determine that, we could fit 3 megawatts on campus behind the meter. I think there's a certain level of motivation that's necessary to pursue a project like this. It's different, it's something that they haven't done before, so without buy-in from a lot of people, they may not discover the economic benefits of it, which is why I have hope that it will change in the near future. My particular question was, what tilt and angle is optimal if you're trying to maximize the financial benefit versus maximize the energy benefit, or there's the third component, which is a little bit more obscure, is reducing the maximum peak demand on campus. So all three of those actually result in different parameters for the solar array. I assume that some of the research is going to be continuing that, looking at new angles. Ohio University owns and operates its own internal grid. The financials around off-grid solar are just still a little bit on the fringes. On a residential scale, the economics make a little bit more sense, but OU buys over 100,000 megawatt hours of electricity annually.
My son went to Stevens Institute of Technology right before Hurricane Sandy went right over his campus. And Stevens had enough capacity that enabled the students, while they were locked on an unintended island for a week and a half, to be able to charge their laptops, charge their phones, communicate back home with parents, and that capacity alone was worthwhile.
The decision-making process around deploying a solar project is much more nuanced than just, I need electrons to power stuff. I think that's a great point.
And up next is Sarah Conley-Ballou.
The university obviously has explored solutions around solar and renewable energy. So has the city of Athens and the Athens County community for a long time. Rural Action, which is an organization creating an energy home and hub. Rural Action works on community development in a broader scale in the 23-county area in Appalachian, Ohio. And we are now creating the Sustainable Energy Solutions program as part of a suite of services and program areas that Rural Action focuses on, from environmental ed to zero waste. It's an incredible organization that has really built and sustained a lot of really important community development work here in the region. The Department of Energy set out to encourage and foster communities like ours to think outside the box around what is community solar and how can community solar be deployed. In Appalachian, Ohio, we serve and work in a community where resources are somewhat scarce. We said, hey, Department of Energy, we'd like to pitch a pretty big idea. How do we build investment and create tools here to grow our solar? The Solar Access team ultimately landed on working on a carbon fee campaign. We are a community that creates a lot of carbon. Southeast Ohio Public Energy Council, which is an aggregation program based here in Athens, which centralizes and aggregates our electricity customers here in Athens. And they were willing to take on this idea of how do we account for those social costs of carbon, and how do we create a mechanism to recover those costs and turn the premiums that are tacked onto our utility bill customers' accounts into solar. We put a ballot initiative on the City of Athens ballot this past May that would consider whether the customers here in Athens would approve an opt-out carbon fee, raising the price of energy to account for just some of the costs of the carbon emissions caused by energy consumption. We pay for our electricity every day, and yet we're really only paying a small amount of the total cost of carbon. This proposed opt-out carbon fee would really only charge about 2 cents per kilowatt hour to all of the retail energy customers here in the city of Athens. This would be an average of $1.60 to $1.80 per customer per month. And that the revenues collected through this fee would be directly invested into community solar projects in the city of Athens. The goal of this, again, is to divert money that we would otherwise be, each of us paid for how much carbon we're actually consuming. That's about 2.7 cents per kilowatt hour, or in an average home, $21 to $25 per household per month. A large increase and something that most homes, especially in Southeast Ohio, couldn't bear. So what SOPEC proposed was a 2 cent per kilowatt hour increase, which for an average home would range between $1.60 and $1.80 per household, designed to offset that total cost of carbon and create a mechanism, a stream of revenue for solar projects. These projects in the city of Athens are public buildings. Athens City School District is in the process right now of building several new facilities and renovating some. So this is a potential revenue stream to create solar for those those school buildings. If we took every current utility customer in the city of Athens, each customer paid in 0.2 cents per kilowatt hour. That should generate annually enough funding for 60 kilowatt installations, or around $10,000 per year in savings throughout the service life of these solar arrays. And if we look ahead, where does that take us after 10 years? This 600 kilowatt portfolio of projects offsets up to 900,000 kilowatt hours and saves us over 100 grand per year on an ongoing basis. It's a small percentage of what ultimately this can scale to create. The carbon fee dollars, leveraged with other dollars through the power purchase agreement model, PPA model, really helps us scale this much larger. It's a way to sort of build and institutionalize solar funding. This is not just happening in a vacuum. The City of Athens has really made a commitment to building out solar. A key part of their Athens Sustainability Action Plan is to increase their solar generation capacity by 20% by 2020. This won't entirely meet that goal. Many governments set these sustainability targets. Athens can use these funds to meet their benchmarks and move forward. The City of Athens is demonstrating a model that works. There will be renewable energy credits generated from these facilities. Those get put back into the ratepayers' overall benefit from the program. We did talk to a lot of voters, and in the process, not only did we talk about the carbon fee, but we just talked about why solar matters and how solar is a key part of the overall economy and community development strategy. We had a lot of events. We put up yard signs, we had a celebration at the Jackie O's Tap Room, which was a lot of fun, and ultimately, the voters went to the ballot box, and we were very pleased to see that around 76% of voters in Athens approved this ballot measure. A real mandate, a real sign of strength and support. We are currently in the step now where we're figuring out the plan of operations and how to create this structure so that when the fees are collected, which would begin in June of 2020, how they can be identified for and prioritized for sites around the city. The other goal is that this model be replicated in other SOPEC member communities, of which there are now 13 throughout Southeast Ohio.
I think it's incredible, and the only place in the country that's happening legally and authoritatively is Oregon. I'm very supportive of all these ideas, but can there be a roundup for job training? Because the shutter plant in Lordstown train people to become millwrights, electricians, and welders, and things like that, and say, what are you rounding up to? I rounded up to a buck. That, you must be rich. So if there's any kind of, say, I want solar power, I want solar panels. No, I want to train a millwright to retool that factory. Instead of having solar panels, I think a Tesla car made of Lordstown. Aha.
And people round up even more, invest more than agree. It is part of a broader strategy of supporting the value chain of the solar industry, certainly not the only tool in the toolkit. The Southeast Ohio Public Energy Council's aggregation program is an opt-out program. So here in Ohio, I want to buy this type of energy, and you can always opt into any program you want. However, in the SOPEC aggregation area, you are automatically opted into the aggregation program, and you're paying that aggregation rate, that utility rate, if you live in the city of Athens, unless you decide to shop around and find power elsewhere.
I'm going to opt out of polluting with carbon.
You do not want to pay the carbon fee. You can opt out of the SOPEC aggregation program at any time. By opting out, you leave this program. By participating in it and sticking around, you're supporting solar development in your communities. It's grid tied to the city.
The utility splits off the monies and sends it to some bucket at the city?
Yeah, you could look at it that way. That 2 cents per kilowatt hour gets put into a designated fund. With SOPEC in concert, decide where those dollars are best utilized and invested. In theory, you could do it with any retail energy supplier that wants to create this mechanism. Unfortunately, I don't know that a lot of retail energy suppliers are taking that initiative themselves. So I think it was key that SOPEC said, hey, we've got 10,000 customers and we want all of them to pay a small portion into this revenue fund, into this community solar fund. AEP Energy and AEP On-Site Partners said, okay, we're willing to try that for this community that wants to think outside the box and do something different.
PBFs, public benefit funds, and they raise additional dollars, especially in regulated states, to deploy renewables, but oftentimes they're not local deployment, which is sort of the challenge on that one. We do have a growing capacity in renewable energy research. Project that we have with AEP, we got funded about a year ago. We've been working on a few different areas, site selection procedures and processes, grid reliability and resiliency. Where can we put solar that won't be a burden on the grid or raise additional costs? We got this project last spring. Here's a couple of snippets of newspaper clippings and such. You can see Bill came to campus and met with myself, my dean, President Nellis of the university. So we're all sort of fired up about the investment in the project. The stimulus for this was the settlement in 2016. We know this narrative of decommissioning coal-fired power plants, especially in the Appalachian part of Ohio, and they made a commitment as part of a settlement with the Sierra Club and NRDC and some other folks to deploy, in particular, 500 megawatts of wind and 400 of solar. And so we are studying that 400 megawatts of solar aspect. Back in 2017, they said we want the projects to be in Appalachian, Ohio. We want the projects to have as much local labor and impacts. There's been this narrative of a manufacturing hub in the region. And we want to hire vets. Those are the three key things to take away from the RFP that we're looking for. Ultimately, they wanted the projects to be interconnected and operational by the end of 2021, so about 2.5 years from now. There's this Hecate Energy Highland Solar Farm, the bigger one, 300 megawatts, and then Willowbrook, which is 100 megawatts, both down in southwest Ohio, Highland County, and a little bit into Brown for Willowbrook. There was this big public hearing at the PUCO, or Public Utilities Commission, back in December. I was there, Sarah was there, some others in the room might have been there. A lot of people there. There was 50-something that formally provided testimony and all spoke in favor of it. Since then, the Ohio Consumers Council and some other groups have recommended against the project and pushed back a little bit against these projects and said, with a very narrow view about the economics, and this is going to raise rates for AEP's ratepayers. From that very narrow cost perspective, they said, we don't need this generation asset anyway. We have enough generation as part of our mix already. The PUCO staff sort of took that narrow view themselves and had a formal recommendation or advice against the projects just in January of this year. And so now it's at the commission level. So there's 5 commissioners of the PUCO. My folks have told me that they're going to take a broader view on the economic impacts and the pollution mitigation impacts. But it remains to be seen. So we're sort of patiently waiting to see what happens there. In unison with this, there's this Ohio Power Siting Board process. This is another sort of procedural. They have local hearings where they go down in elementary schools in the region, and then they have hearings in Columbus. So those have to also get approved through that process. I was at the first one on February 19 down in Highland County for Willowbrook Solar. A lot of folks there. There were 20-something folks that spoke in favor of the project with only sort of 2 or 3 dissenting opinions. A lot of the narratives against the projects were around the use of agricultural land, selling out our rural way of life. There were some articles about that. They had a rendering of the plots of land where they were citing the project, and these are the Highland project and the Willowbrook project. But what's the role of the Voinovich School? For the funding, our role is to be an independent arbiter and run models and report that we're working on and understand the economic and workforce implications. We're doing some pollution impacts. Just to give you a quick taste. What does that mean for greenhouse gas emissions, reductions, independently weighing the costs and benefits of the project?
Manufacturing jobs happening in the background because there's this increase in demand for intermediate goods. So in this case, it's going to be modules and inverters. It's going to be increase in spending because of the manufacturing jobs and the construction job, and that's going to induce additional spending in the economy. Here it is some of the jobs that are going to be associated with the project, and most of the salaries associated with those jobs are higher than the Ohio median, so these are high-paying jobs. There's not enough labor within these occupations in Appalachian, Ohio to meet the demand. Appalachian, Ohio tends to have high unemployment. There's also a bunch of displaced workers because of the recent closures of coal-fired power plants and mines. So it's not that there is no labor, it's just that there's a mismatch of skills. And we think Ohio has enough to meet the labor demand created by the project. So if you look at training centers, they're mostly concentrated in Cleveland, Columbus, Cincinnati. There's not a lot in Appalachian, Ohio. Specifically, if you look at the PV installer occupation, which is easiest to transition to relatively, there's only 2 centers that we know of. They're in North Ohio. What kind of programs are being offered? And
there's a lot of moving parts in this project. Policy-oriented things, environmental-oriented issues, workforce development, important keystones in making all of this work. Just looking at electrical substations in the state of Ohio of varying size, substations coupled with transmission lines, because obviously if we're going to put in solar facilities, we want to be able to connect to the grid. We want to do that in the most cost-effective way. Location of appropriate workforce, geography is a big issue. So we collect that information. We can couple that with solar irradiance. So this gives you a little bit of an idea of the sunlight you can get per square meter within the state. The red down in the southwest corner is a little bit higher than the northeast corner. So those would factor in as well. Obviously we might be looking more at the Appalachian region. Putting all those things together along with piles of other data, making wise choices on where to site these facilities. Building models that will allow us to aggregate these data in intelligent ways, weighted criteria. We look at it simple 2-dimensional, we can look at 3-dimensional, we can aggregate and overlay other variables and scale them based on essentially what kind of inputs people have that would make the model suitable to try to optimize across a range of competing criteria.
There's a lot of complex regulatory procedures and things going on with the Highland County projects right now, so we're waiting to see what happens with those. We have an important role to serve infrastructural pieces. If AEP has a desire to deploy more solar, should these projects fall through.
They say solar has cost parity now with coal plants. Well, why is it so difficult for OU if that's true? Is it because they have to build all these arrays?
The way things are, and then there's all these regulatory procedures and things that make it more difficult to think about innovative strategies. But I know like costs have been declining, both labor and module costs.
To the extent that we could get data quantified in the right way, or make an assessment, maybe provide some interactive capability where people could set some thresholds for those things, the sky's the limit on what that can be.
We have Matt Roberts, formerly of Upgrade, Ohio. He's done a lot of really fantastic work here locally. Matt is now working with GoBus, electric buses statewide, where the cutting edge of the technology and where it's going right now. To my right, I have Jimmy Smith. Jimmy is with ChargePoint, one of the largest charging manufacturers in the country, really working on deployment and building out the infrastructure so that folks can use EVs without range anxiety to use them everywhere they go. And Michael Smucker. Michael's with Greenwatts, also doing chargers. So we can go really deep on chargers today. If you guys want to really get in the weeds on what fast chargers look like and where they're going, Jimmy, if you want to introduce yourself real quick and talk about what it is you guys do and where you see this sector going over the next 10 years.
Jimmy Smith with ChargePoint, based out of Columbus, Ohio. We do not only charging stations, but the network that connects them all, a full suite of products, home, multifamily, fleet, public mixed use, and 4 different types of DC fast chargers. So where do we see the market going kind of in the next 10 years? I'm extremely enthusiastic. I've been in this space for about 5 years now, and what we've seen even in Ohio and how it's been developing, from the idea of like, well, is this really going to be something that's panning out and where it's coming to? Now we know it is. When is it going to be here? We see every major automotive manufacturer in the market either has an electric car on the market or has plans to do one within like 2 years, maybe 4 years tops. 48 different types already available, some within the state. The shift has already begun to go electric. The big players have spent $50 billion plus. We may have saw the announcement of GM pulling out of some of the manufacturing places in Ohio. With that announcement, though, they said that they were going to be focusing more on electric vehicles. With seeing the Model 3 being the #1 selling car of the car category for a couple of months last year, that's already like saying dividends right then. It's the hockey stick curve. We're just creeping up right now, and it is going to straight up explode.
Michael, I know you from your past life in solar. Talk about the building of infrastructure and how to connect together, the synergies in both of those sectors of the economy.
Before getting into the EV charging infrastructure, I had spent 3 years in the solar business here as a marketing and sales executive. I see them going hand in hand. In fact, I'm joking with the guys on the panel because it was at the first Solar Congress in Zanesville that Matt got up and talked about EV car clubs, and I thought, oh, how cool is that? Like, I want to join one of those. And Jimmy Judy talked about EV charging, and I didn't realize that anybody was like making a living in that kind of business. This event was the eye-opener for me. Now that I'm in the EV charging space, and similar to Jimmy, our company, Greenwatts, is a provider of EV charging solutions and building out the infrastructure. Solar game and this charging infrastructure, it's very parallel. The networking is very similar to the way we did it in solar, with all the community groups and the city governments, companies, and the same is happening with the EV charging business. We work with the utilities, the city governments, apartment complexes, any company that you can name, fleets or for workplace charging. Part of the stimulus for the development of the infrastructure has been Dieselgate, a big driving force in the building of EV charging infrastructure. And the next part is the utilities. The trend across the country is that utilities are embracing the coming of this kind of electrified transportation. AEP Ohio has launched a utility incentive program so that they offer to pay, in some instances, almost the entire cost, or up to 50% depending on in what use case you're using the charging for. But they're taking that step forward in this incentive because they want to understand the charging. They want basically the data. Who's plugging in, when they're plugging in, where they're plugging in, how often they're plugging in. Collection of this data is a big part of the driving force of the deployment of that. It's all interconnected. And just like I used to say in solar, everybody owns a home, or a lot of people own a home, you can go solar there. Everybody's kids go to school somewhere, everybody shops somewhere, everybody works somewhere. Every one of those places is an opportunity for solar. Everybody in this room is an opportunity to push that agenda forward at those places. EVs are the same way, both the adoption of electric vehicles and in the demand for electric charging. So the places that you go to school, the towns you live in, the places you shop, tell them you want charging. I want to be able to go to the places I want to go in my life, and I want to be able to plug in my car and charge up so I can get everywhere I want to go.
So the Village Bakery, they have a charger there. Partly because of Matt's work at Upgrade, also Stewart's Opera House. They also did a low interest loan program a few years ago, which was a national model. So a lot of really cool stuff happening right out of this community. I've asked Matt about the future of public transit and what's really on the horizon for electrification of that space as well.
I am now the manager of the Go Bus, Ohio's rural inner city bus program. It's allowed me to step into this new world, aside from the solar community that I've been involved with or the local aggregation efforts. Ohio is one of the leaders in the country as a state for transitioning to any alternative fuel for transit. Lake Tran, they're the Erie County community. They just got funding from the Federal Transit Administration to pull out some of their older buses and invest in 3 all-electric transit buses, because it's going to eventually actually save them money operationally on fuel and for maintaining the vehicles themselves. You go over to Canton in Stark County, SARTA, the Stark Area Regional Transit Authority. They're the leader in the country, if not the world, in hydrogen fuel cell electric deployment. So they have multiple vehicles running on hydrogen fuel cell technology. The emission of that is essentially water. Regional transit authorities stepping up and making these investments and showing that it's a good business decision to retool how we think about mobility and how we think about transporting people. As a public transit agency, we should be reducing our emissions as much as we can. So it's exciting to see that. You look across the world, China and India, they're doing massive subsidies, which is just a fancy word for public investment. Invest in their health, to invest in manufacturing capabilities. They are deploying electric buses en masse, largely because they have a pollution problem. Hundreds, if not thousands, of people are dying every day just from particulate matter that come out of buses, diesel buses. The context in the United States is more along the lines of job development and retraining people that have certain skills to enter this new clean energy economy, and electrification of transportation is a keystone part of that transition. We have this need to reduce our emissions from the power sector, and electric vehicles can really help serve a lot of different needs for the electric grid itself. Thinking of electric vehicles as moving energy storage. How can we utilize these vehicles to reduce electric costs for everyone else?
One of our staff drove a Model 3 from DC yesterday.
There's a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle which completely ends the range anxiety type questions that you're asking right now, which is that they have a X amount of range on fully electric and then they can go to gasoline as a backup after that. So the fully electric vehicle experience would be depends on the car itself and how much range you have. The first cars in the market all had like 80 miles of range, which is fine for about 95% of all driving experiences because everybody drives around town. They go to work, they come back, they pick up kids. 80 miles a day is generally fine. I would actually characterize it about 1% to 5% of overall driving is more of those long distance ranges. If you're on a Tesla supercharger network, they have built their Tesla chargers out enough that they spaced it that the car can go from one to the other and charge along the way so that they can get navigation to it, have that great user experience. Other vehicles on the market, they go from about 80 miles of range up to about 340 miles of range. There's chargers that are only getting faster. Most times I ballpark at about 40 minutes, you'll get 80% of your charge. So grab a sandwich type thing. As more chargers come out in the network that are only charging faster, that time is extremely reduced. That technology exists, it's being installed today as it's being rolled out. As more and more cars are able to accept that amount of power, we'll see that same more of a gas station model of how that feels. But in honesty, most people are just going to charge at home. It's an overnight charge, you have all the battery capacity you need on there, you go do your daily driving, and it's just like a gas car, except you don't go to a gas station anymore.
When I would engage people in solar, about going solar at their house, the first thing they would say is, oh, I really want to go off grid. I live in Columbus and I really want to go off. I'm not getting solar until I can go off grid. Someone in the business of solar had to try to help them understand that there are these incremental steps toward it, that having a grid-tied solar system that was accessible to you now, the energy you could buy there was less expensive than the energy you buy from utility. Same with EV. Jimmy said it. 95% of what we all drive in our lives, with the lowest range EV available on the market, you can do 95% of your driving. I get this question about this, well, what about a long trip? I understand what you're thinking about, but you first think about that 95% of your life. And then, on the long trip, Jimmy's exactly right. The cars are getting longer ranges, the infrastructure is being built out. He didn't mention that there is another initiative called Electrify America, which is part of the Volkswagen Dieselgate settlement money. And that initiative is putting 2,800 plus DC fast chargers, plus maybe another 3,000 or so level 2 ports all across the country, basically an effort to electrify the highway corridors all around the country. The game is fully on, the infrastructure is being built, the cars are here, and lots more are coming, so don't delay, get your EV now.
It's all about the electrical capacity. There would have to be an investment to increase that capacity so that you have enough electric load to serve that fast charge power that you need. And that's what people are looking for. You could put a level 2 or smaller charger at these stations, but you're not going to get the speed that you're wanting. So the level 2 are kind of more for like the shopping centers, the places where you're going to be there for a few hours. So there would have to be an investment by the gas station themselves, but perhaps it's the utility that is serving it. AEP Ohio is starting to look at this. It's a chance for them to sell more electricity, right? They are in the business of taking electricity from suppliers and selling it back to you. So it is in their interest to get involved in this, and I think you're going to start seeing a lot more of that from utilities stepping up and trying to find the right place, like a gas station or right along the highway where it's needed, in between communities, where the distance for an electric car is just a little bit too long to feel comfortable to make that trip, or to even make the purchase of electric cars.
You put a solar array there, it really is more acting as a billboard to say clean energy lives here. Let's say it's a 1.4 kilowatt array. That array is part of the installation, but it's just feeding back into the grid. It's all positive, there's no downside to it, but it's because of the intermittent nature of the sun, it's not feeding the charging directly. Not to say that it couldn't, it's just that it's probably not as practical.
There's many apps on the market that tell people where charging is at. Both of us have an app, as our subsequent companies are developing those to find them. There's also one from the Department of Energy called Alternative Fuel Data Center. So I'd recommend Alternative Fuel Data Center, ChargePoint app, the Greenwatts app, and PlugShare. Not necessarily in that order, but those in general. Every shop that I've been talking to, they will have to be able to sell the vehicle. They have to have their technicians go through a training.
Most EVs have warranties 100,000, 8 to 10 years. We have a Chevy Volt with a V, the extended range vehicle. I fully expect my brake pads and rotors to last 300,000 miles. We are currently on our third oil change. We have over 100,000 miles in the car, so the maintenance costs are dropping down significantly. There are so few moving parts in the electrical motors themselves that the regular mechanical corrections you'd have to make historically, your water pump goes out. But the actual drivetrain itself is way more elegant to where it's going to require less of those regular trips. The drivetrain, in the short term, absolutely, there's going to be a specific skill set. And in fact, Hawking used to offer that as part of their curriculum. I think you're going to see an uptick in that again of training programs that are going to be centered around 48-volt systems and electric cars. It's still a little ways off, but increasingly folks are buying used EVs. But even in the used market, they are lasting a very long time. My car doesn't even have a transmission, so that's one less piece I don't have to worry about. I think eventually we'll scale accordingly. But
scientists on this, just depends on what area of the country you're in. They've calculated a figure called miles per gallon equivalent. So it's obviously not gallons when you're driving an electric car, but they've created an equivalent. So in Ohio or in the Midwest, an electric car today gets about 45 miles per gallon equivalent. That's how much it would be if it were a gas car. You go to Pacific Northwest, it's in the 100 mile per gallon equivalent area, or California, where they have deployed a lot more renewable energy, and that is just a part of their electric grid. They have a larger share of renewables that serve their electric grid. So it just depends on the region. Still more efficient, it's still a better deal for you to buy an electric car today on that efficiency standpoint than internal combustion.
And as we deploy more renewables, those numbers are going to get better and better. So these electric cars are already on the road, but as the grid becomes greener and greener, sources are going to become greener and greener.
You wouldn't believe it, but actually the heater has a bigger impact than the air conditioning in the summer. So they come with a window sticker like any car and say, here's what your average miles per charge would be. In the summer we do better than that, and in the winter we do a little bit less than that. Also, just like a normal gas car, your driving habits affect your range. If you are a speed demon out of the gate, you're going to have less range.
And I'm learning this myself with my EV, but it can economize the heat in a few ways, and one of which is preheat the car while it's plugged in at home. So then you are heating it up using the car heater. A lot of them come with steering wheel heaters and seat heaters. Heat it all up, get it really nice and toasty, then I turn off the car heating and just leave the steering wheel heater and the heat seater on, the heater and the seat on while I'm driving to help economize my energy and hopefully not freeze.
It's more efficient to heat your hands and your butt than it is the air around you. So they all come, pretty much all of them have it as a standard option on EV. You're saying converting old gasoline cars to electric. I think it's fun. I honestly want a 1911 converted to a gas, so I can still have that body of it. Or even some of those old original electric cars that there was a heyday of electric in the early turn of the century, the last turn. I know we're seeing this newer one that's coming up now, but that's a tinkering market, just enthusiasts. There's a whole new market that's developing about second life electric vehicle batteries. And they're going to be used, in my opinion, for data centers that already need these types of it, because it's leveling out peaking of the grid. Those peaks get extremely expensive. It could be used as the same thing for a DC fast charger, leveling out those peaks in the middle of the day and then trickle charging overnight. So then you're using a battery throughout the center of it when pricing is high. Take advantage of cheap power off hours.
GM has been teasing at SEMA for a couple of years, for the past 6 months actually, an electric crate motor. So folks who are upgrading old vehicles, it's become very trendy to add new engines in it. Well, they're just starting to market and just tiptoeing in the water a little bit. And I think you're going to see a lot of things open up once that happens, but it is still very niche at this point. There's a lot of work that's to be done around the inverters, make it all work, controllers rather. It's still pretty expensive. Over the next decades, you're going to see deploying more cars showing up in junkyards, people tinker. That's going to be a really cool thing to develop, but it is still a ways off.
So if you look at a company out in San Diego called EV West, you'll see the conversions that they're doing, and part of the guy that runs that organization, part of his mission when he converts is he gets the performance of the converted car to be better than the performance of the gas. And he's converting all kinds of stuff. It's accessible to do. It's more like a tinkering thing. The weight would definitely be a factor. AEP has the incentive program, so they're giving companies like us, we're the two companies that deploy that program. So we're working hard at it, trust me, both of us, to see that grow, not just in Columbus, but everywhere.
Look at Easton Town Center, if you've gone and used one of them with your Leaf. They have those open for free. They're providing that as an amenity. They own them. There's other places like Ohio State University or even Ohio University where they own them and providing them as an amenity, but do collect revenue from them to cover their cost. Let's use Ohio University because I was over there using it right now. They're charging 75 cents an hour for the use of it, and that's kind of a steal. If I were to charge at home the amount of electricity costs for me to do it, I think I'm at like 80 or 90 cents an hour for the amount of electricity I'm going to use. So it's kind of cheaper to charge here than it is in my own home. Ohio State University is $1 an hour. Some other places like $1.50 an hour. So it's still not that much. And to give you an equivalency, me paying like $1 an hour is kind of like $1 a gallon of gasoline. So even if I'm paying that here, I'm fine with that. Even if I was doubling that, I'm still fine with that because it's still going to be cheaper than driving gas.
So a lot of public transit agencies are funded in various different ways, and sometimes like a sales tax on goods in their community, so like a sales levy. You could advocate for a higher sales tax on products. Maybe you can specifically target that to high-earning corporations. There's something that was done in Portland called the Portland Clean Energy Measure. And so they impose a 1% tax essentially on their profits if they earn a certain amount of revenue. That's recognizing that they have a lot of power economically and they need to contribute to transit efforts because a lot of people will use transit to get to their business and buy their goods. Talked about the aggregation and the carbon fee model. I don't see why that can't be applied to mobility and electrification of cars as well. Or, a rural cooperative could get into this space, a municipal electric utility could get into this space where they're investing in that infrastructure and the electric vehicles themselves to actually, supply another service, as in mobility, as in public transportation. And I think that's particularly important in rural communities where they don't have the capital or the sales that you would normally collect from people just buying goods to invest in a public transit system. You see that a lot in Appalachian Ohio. It's rare to see transit offered in rural communities. So you have to get really creative and you have to work in the local government sphere and to convince them that this is an investment in the future. Do not be afraid of the costs because it's actually a service. And people need it.
The question was the proposal in House Bill 62, which is the transportation budget, of adding a $200 fee for EV registrations on an annual basis, which will make Ohio among the highest in the country. We'll be in the company with West Virginia of having the highest. And a similar piece of the legislation is a $100 fee per year for hybrids. So that is concerning. That would be a huge step backwards in Ohio as we try to advance this economy and try to encourage manufacturers to build EVs in Ohio. It's a really negative market signal. So that's something we're very aware of and very concerned about.
I encourage anybody to reach out to your elected officials into there. We need to keep promoting this for not only the green energy, the amount that it's going to help our economy, as well as just help our environment. They listen to
House Bill 62 is the current legislation. Complementary piece to the gas tax increase for EV owners to quote pay their fair share. There's a lot of arguments against that this is a really young industry trying to really scale, encourage people to do the right thing by adopting EVs and being part of the solution for a lot of problems. But even beyond that, the formula they've used to reach this, we find to be very unfair as well. The last folks I was talking to, I believe the EV is 30 miles per gallon is the number they're using to justify. So even in the math and the calculations, there are some issues. Even if you're in favor of a small, modest increase, this is definitely way too much, especially when we're talking about folks buying EVs on the used market. The entire grid is being decarbonized, and I've heard industry executives, utilities, admitting as much. They're business people at the end of the day. Most of them are making decisions based on economics. It is now cheaper to deploy renewable energy, so solar, wind, than it is to maintain coal-fired power plants. Increasingly, it's leaving natural gas behind as well, but in particular coal, it is leaving it in a big way. Having a regional grid, which we're part of, allows the load to be balanced. So wind is a really nice complementary technology to where it's usually sunny or windy. And as you alluded to, batteries are an important piece of this. So as storage really starts ramping up, and Ohio is #2 in the country, I believe, on storage right now at the utility scale, those concerns really fall to the wayside, and we have the ability to produce power when it's available and use it when we need it. So I think that shift is happening, and it's because economics. I'd like to think it's, because it's the right thing to do, or environmental reasons, but frankly the math is really driving a lot of that. And there's a value in deployed batteries for the grid as well, helping balance the load and power supply and the alternating current be a cleaner supply. So there's a lot of really great reasons to have storage deployed beyond electric cars, but definitely electric cars are going to be a piece of the usage moving forward. I continue to believe very strongly that solar and wind, I would say at the utility scale, are going to be a major piece of the solution as well. But certainly now that the math is well in our favor, it absolutely can.
We are working off of a electric utility model that is very outdated. These large utilities, mostly investor-owned utilities, want to keep these uneconomical plants, the coal mostly, online and keep them on their books so that they can earn a guaranteed profit on it. That's what's going on here, is that all across the country, utilities are slowing their progress because they want to keep these online as much as possible and put rate payers like you, electric bill payers, on the hook for them. If we localize and decentralize that model in as many different policy mechanisms as possible, it's going to be a lot easier to deploy these solar, wind, and energy storage applications. Once we get to a point where these electric vehicles and their charging ports are bi-directional, as in not just inputting power from the electric grid, but using the electric power stored in the electric car to push out and serve the grid when it needs to ramp up, when everyone comes home at night and wants to turn on their appliances. We need the policy mechanisms in place to allow for that. We need a market developed so people want to invest in an electric vehicle because they're going to get a kickback or paid or a reduced rate on their electricity by having that, by serving a need to the electric grid for everyone else. A lot of those decisions happen at the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio, which a lot of people in the state don't know about. They don't know that that's where all of the action happens. So that's another kind of battleground place where people need to get involved, because these companies just keep it on the books and they say this is part of our electric security plans. In that case, we really need to reconsider and rethink that monopoly control on electricity. But it takes time and a lot of organizing effort.
Ohio's a deregulated market, so the generators are supposed to be separate from the place you buy your power from.